1944, Crystal City Internment Camp, Texas. The sun had barely risen when 23 Jewish women stood frozen in a dirt courtyard, staring at a wooden bulletin board where a single sheet of paper fluttered in the dry wind. The guards didn't understand why the women trembled, why several whispered prayers, why one, Ilse Klein, suddenly collapsed to her knees. But Hildegard Rosenthal, the quiet German Jewish photographer who had arrived days earlier to document daily life, understood instantly. The typed notice listed new repatriation evaluations, and for the women who had escaped Nazi Germany, the word repatriation felt like a death sentence. They had fled Europe's terror, crossed oceans, survived interrogations, and now lived behind American fences. Yet the idea of being sent back toward the continent they had barely escaped cracked something inside them. A guard helped Ilse stand, but her legs shook under her as she whispered, "They think we are Germans. They don't know we are Jews." Her voice broke into a sob she tried to hide. The guard looked confused, almost guilty. Many of these American soldiers had never met Jewish refugees before. To them, everyone who had come from German-speaking regions was simply enemy alien. Hildegard raised her camera, but she did not take the photograph. She lowered it slowly. Some moments, she thought, did not need to be frozen on film. They were already carved into the human heart with more permanence than a shutter could capture. 5 hours later, the same group of women found themselves being escorted through the dusty Texas road outside camp boundaries. It was a rare allowance granted by the camp director, once a month, a supervised trip to a local supermarket in Carrizo Springs. The guards thought it was a small privilege, nothing more. They did not understand that these women had come from cities where bread was rationed, where meat disappeared entirely, where coffee existed only in memory. They did not know that most of the women had watched neighbors dragged into the streets for smuggling a handful of potatoes. Rabbi Leo Mayer had arrived at the camp the previous evening, and though his visits were rare and brief, his presence this morning felt like a fragile beam of comfort. He carried no weapons, no authority, only a worn book of Psalms. Walking beside the women, he whispered to Ilse, "Whatever you see today, let it remind you that the world is bigger than cruelty." But the women were too shaken to reply. Hildegard walked behind them, carrying her camera at her chest, documenting the morning sun slicing across the fences, the guards wiping sweat from their necks, the Jewish women clutching their identification cards as if they were shields. When the group reached the sliding doors of the Carrizo Springs supermarket, everything changed in the span of 3 seconds. The doors opened with a soft hiss, an ordinary sound to the locals, but to the women, it was like stepping into another planet. The air was cool, fragrant with baked bread and oranges. Shelves stretched endlessly, bright and overflowing. There were 5 kinds of sugar, 3 types of coffee, rows of fruit glowing under clean lights. Ilse stopped breathing for a moment. Ruth Oppenheimer gasped and grabbed her arm. A younger woman, Gerda Kramer, covered her mouth with both hands and whispered in German, "Es ist nicht möglich. It can't be real." The guards shuffled awkwardly, unsure what to do as tears began rolling silently down several faces. One woman, Miriam Rosenfeld, walked straight to the fruit aisle, placed her palms on a pile of bright yellow lemons, and suddenly bent forward, shaking. She wasn't crying because of the abundance. She was crying because she realized that everything Nazi propaganda had told her about America, that it was a land of greed, poverty, and cruelty, was a lie. And everything they had said about Jews deserving starvation, expulsion, and extermination was an even bigger lie. Hildegard finally raised her camera. She captured a single image, Miriam's shaking hands touching the lemons, Rabbi Mayer standing behind her with a face full of sorrow and awe, and an American guard in the background frozen in confusion. Ilse stepped toward the bread aisle. "There are so many kinds," she whispered. "Look at all of this. In Frankfurt, my mother once traded her wedding ring for a single loaf." Her voice cracked, and the guard nearest to her shifted uncomfortably, staring at the floor. Rabbi Mayer reached for her shoulder. "You are safe here," he murmured. "You must believe that." But Ilse didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on the shelves, on the abundance, on the life that had been denied to millions like her. She felt a strange mixture of gratitude, grief, and guilt tearing through her chest. She lived. They did not. Behind the bakery counter, a middle-aged American woman wearing a white apron approached with gentle curiosity. "Ma'am, would you like to try a sample?" she asked, offering a small piece of warm bread. Ilse took it with trembling fingers. When she tasted it, she began to cry so hard she could not speak. For the first time since arriving in America, the guards understood something essential. These women hadn't been enemies. They had been victims long before they stepped on American soil. Hildegard lowered her camera again. She realized at this moment, the shock, the tears, the overwhelming sense of safety and loss colliding at once, was not simply a piece of history. It was the beginning of a truth these women had never dared to believe. The world still held goodness. And yet, beneath the warm lights and rows of fruit, a darker uncertainty lingered. The repatriation list. The files mislabeled. The quiet fear that safety in Texas could vanish with a clerk's signature. For now, though, they stood inside a supermarket that shattered every lie ever forced upon them. And that was enough to breathe again. The walk back to Crystal City felt heavier than the walk out, even though the women carried small paper bags filled with bread, apples, and sugar that the guards had allowed them to purchase. The Texas sun pressed down on them, but for the first time in months, several women welcomed the heat. It grounded them. It reminded them that they were alive, far away from the cracked cobblestones and smoke-blackened streets of Europe. Yet as they crossed the open road toward the camp's fenced perimeter, an uneasiness brewed beneath the relief. Ilse kept glancing at the guard tower, watching the silhouettes of soldiers who knew nothing of her family, her losses, or the fear that still gripped her despite the overwhelming display of American abundance. She squeezed the paper bag in her hands until the corners tore. Every sound, the creak of the wooden gate, the metal lock clanking, a distant train horn, made her flinch. Freedom so close, and still unreachable. Inside the camp, daily life resumed its strange rhythm. Children ran barefoot in the dust, chasing a battered rubber ball. Men repaired shacks with scrap wood. Women washed clothes in communal basins, their conversations rising and falling in German, Yiddish, Hungarian, and Czech. Crystal City was a world suspended in contradiction, safety beside confinement, hope tangled with uncertainty. Hildegard wandered among them, her camera hanging from her neck but unused. The images she had taken at the supermarket haunted her, hands trembling over lemons, tears streaking faces, hope and grief colliding in ways a camera could barely contain. She needed to understand these women more deeply before she continued documenting their lives. She believed photographs meant nothing without the truth behind them. She approached the laundry area where Ilse and Ruth were washing clothes. Ilse scrubbed a shirt with furious intensity, as if trying to erase an invisible stain, while Ruth rinsed a blanket in silence. Finally, Ruth broke the quiet. "It was too much," she whispered. "All of it. The fruit, the bread, everything." Ilse shook her head. "It was beautiful. Terrifying, too. Because it showed us that the world kept moving while we hid and ran. While others died." Hildegard didn't lift her camera. Instead, she knelt beside them, letting the warm water soak her hands. "You don't have to talk if it hurts," she said gently. But Ilse's voice cracked open like a window in a storm. "In Frankfurt, propaganda showed America as a land of selfishness," she said. "We were taught that the Americans were savages who hated us. And then I walk into a shop with more food than I have ever seen in my life. How do you explain that?" "You don't," Ruth murmured. "You survive it." Before Hildegard could respond, the sound of footsteps approached. Rabbi Leo Mayer emerged from behind the wooden schoolhouse, carrying a stack of papers and wearing the same calm expression he always carried. His presence was a balm, quiet, steady, almost holy. He sat beside the women and spoke softly. "I've finished reviewing the new lists posted this morning. There's confusion in the records. Some names that should have been cleared for release were placed under pending evaluation. And some..." He paused. "Some are listed under potential repatriation." Ilsa stopped washing. The blanket slipped from Ruth's hands. Around them, the noises of camp life blurred into a distant hum. Whose names? Ruth asked, her voice barely holding together. Rabbi Meir unfolded the list. Yours isn't on it, he said to Ruth, then turned to Ilsa. But yours. Ilsa, your file is incomplete. Your paperwork from the refugee board is missing a stamp, and someone classified you as an unverified German national instead of a Jewish refugee. Ilsa's blood turned to ice. Her hands shook so violently the water rippled. That can't be right, she whispered. I fled Germany in 41. I have affidavits. The camp office doesn't have them, Rabbi Meir said. I'm trying to find out where the mistake happened. A wave of panic swept through her. The fruit-filled supermarket felt like a dream compared to the brutal clarity of this moment. If they send me back. No one is sending anyone back right now, Hildegard said firmly, though even she wasn't entirely confident. The war is turning against Germany. Everyone knows it. But people still disappear from here, Ilsa said. Families taken for exchanges. Ships sent into war zones. Ruth wrapped her arms around Ilsa. You are not alone. We won't let them take you. Even the children nearby stopped playing, watching the adults with quiet confusion. The atmosphere in the camp shifted, subtle but palpable. Fear had returned, curling into the corners like smoke. Later that afternoon, Hildegard walked toward the administrative building, unable to shake Ilsa's pleading eyes. The guards barely noticed her as she slipped inside. She had no authority to question officials, but she had something else: presence. People underestimated a woman with a camera. They assumed she merely recorded events instead of attempting to change them. She approached the desk where a young clerk sifted through papers. Excuse me, she said, her tone gentle but firm. I'm assisting Rabbi Meir with documentation for the internees. May I look at the repatriation files? The clerk hesitated, glancing at her camera strap. You're the photographer? Yes. He sighed. Fine. Quickly. Just the names, not the confidential notes. Hildegard nodded, but her eyes scanned everything: columns, stamps, signatures, mismatched dates. Then she found it: Ilsa Klein, classification, German/status, pending repatriation review. Her heart tightened. She flipped through another document. There should have been a refugee board certificate. There wasn't. Someone had misfiled or misplaced her identity. And in wartime bureaucracy, mistakes carried the weight of fate. As she stepped back outside, the Texas heat hit her like a wall. She looked across the camp: children laughing, women hanging laundry, men carving wooden toys, and realized that any one of them could vanish if a clerk made one wrong decision. The supermarket had shown the women a glimpse of life. Now the files were showing something far darker: how fragile that life truly was. Night fell over Crystal City with a deceptive softness, as if the Texas sky were trying to soothe a community that had forgotten how to sleep without fear. Lanterns glowed from barracks windows, casting long shapes across the dirt like restless ghosts. Ilsa lay awake on her thin cot, listening to the murmurs of women whispering through the walls. Every sound felt amplified: the creak of wood, a child crying in another room, footsteps crunching outside. She clutched her identification card to her chest as if it could anchor her to safety. Ruth slept nearby, exhausted from worry. But Ilsa could not close her eyes without seeing that list again, her name stamped incorrectly, her fate dangling between two worlds. She had escaped Europe once. The thought of being sent anywhere near it again clawed at her ribs like an invisible hand. A faint knock sounded at her door. Ilsa sat upright instantly, heart pounding. Ruth stirred awake. Before panic could spread, a soft voice whispered, "It's Hildegard." Ilsa opened the door to find the photographer standing beneath the lantern light, her face tense but determined. "I found something," Hildegard said quietly. "We need to talk." They walked toward the unused community kitchen, where only the faint smell of onions and soap lingered. Hildegard set a folder on the wooden table. "I copied what I could," she whispered. Look. Inside were notes, handwritten dates, mismatched signatures, missing stamps. Ilse scanned them, her breath trembling. My refugee papers aren't here. They should have been transferred with me. I know, Hildegard said. That's why I think they were misfiled weeks ago. By mistake? Ruth asked. By mistake, Hildegard repeated, but her tone carried uncertainty. Wartime paperwork was a labyrinth. Mistakes were common. Lives were lost in those mistakes. Ilse pressed a hand to her forehead. If they think I'm a German national, they might put me on an exchange ship. Those ships go into dangerous waters. Hildegard swallowed. She wasn't allowed to mention the stories she'd heard, ships torpedoed, families caught in diplomatic crossfire, but the fear in Ilse's eyes told her she already knew. We'll fix it, Hildegard said. Tomorrow morning, I'll go with Rabbi Meir. We'll petition the camp director to reopen your case. Ilse nodded, but she didn't look convinced. They don't listen to us, she whispered. We're shadows on their forms. Not this time, Hildegard said. You have a voice. And I have a camera. Sometimes that's enough to make people pay attention. A guard's boot scraped outside, and the women fell silent. Only when the footsteps faded did Ilse speak again. This morning in the supermarket, I felt something I haven't felt in years. Safety. Today was the first time I thought maybe life could exist beyond fear. Her voice cracked. I don't want that taken away. Ruth put her arm around her, but Ilse was already trembling. The next morning came too quickly. A dry wind battered the camp, carrying dust across the yards. Women hung blankets on lines, children lined up for school, and guards patrolled with their usual detachment. But the tension around Ilse followed like a shadow. Rabbi Meir met Hildegard near the administrative building. He held a stack of documents tightly, as if shielding them from the breeze. I've prepared everything, he said. Affidavits, letters, the synagogue's confirmations, anything that proves Ilse left Germany because she was Jewish. Hildegard nodded. She's terrified. Everyone here is, the rabbi replied softly. That doesn't mean we stop fighting. Inside the administrative office, the air smelled of ink and dust. The camp director, a stern man with tired eyes, looked up as they entered. Rabbi Meir, Miss Rosenthal. What can I help you with? Hildegard set her folder on the desk. Sir, there's an error in the repatriation documents. One of the women, Ilse Klein, has been misclassified. The director frowned. All records come from Washington. We cannot simply change them. Rabbi Meir leaned forward. Sir, she is a Jewish refugee. She fled Germany because of persecution. Sending her back, even by accident, could cost her life. The director sighed. His shoulders sagged slightly. We are overwhelmed. Files are often incomplete when they arrive. You must understand, this is a wartime facility. Hildegard met his gaze. And she is a human being. The director paused. Something in Hildegard's voice, not demanding, not pleading, but grounded and resolute, struck him. He picked up the folder and skimmed the notes. This is serious, he admitted. If the refugee classification is missing, her case could be mishandled. Will you review it personally? Hildegard asked. He hesitated. I'll review it today. That's all I can promise. It wasn't enough. But it was something. Meanwhile, Ilse sat outside on a broken wooden bench, twisting a piece of string between her fingers. The sky overhead felt enormous, the way it always did in Texas, endless, open, unconcerned. She watched a little girl skip past with a homemade doll and wondered whether she herself would still be here tomorrow, or next week, or lost to some bureaucratic storm she could not control. Ruth joined her, handing her an apple from yesterday's trip. You need to eat, she said. Ilse took a small bite, then paused. You know what I thought about last night, she whispered. Those supermarket shelves. How bright they were. How alive everything felt. I don't want that to be a memory I lose in an ocean somewhere. Ruth squeezed her hand. You won't, But Ilse saw the fear behind her friend's eyes. Across the yard, Hildegard returned with Rabbi Meir, both walking quickly. Ilse stood instantly, breath held, waiting, hoping. Hildegard reached her first. "We're not finished," she said quietly. "But they're listening. And that's a start. A start." In a world where papers decided destiny, a start was as precious as hope. Yet Ilse knew one thing with chilling certainty. Until her name was corrected, the danger around her wasn't gone, it was only waiting. The following morning arrived with the kind of dull, heavy quiet that made every person in Crystal City hold their breath. Even the children sensed the tension. Their usual laughter was muted, replaced by the soft thud of a bouncing ball and whispered questions they didn't fully understand. The wind carried warm dust across the barracks, coating everything it touched with a thin veil of Texas earth, as if the land itself were waiting for something to break open. Ilse woke before sunrise. She hadn't slept more than a few moments at a time, jolting awake each time her mind replayed the same fear. Her name on the wrong list, her life hanging in a balance held by strangers who didn't know her story. She sat at the edge of her cot, braiding her hair just to keep her hands from shaking. Ruth watched her quietly from across the room, the lines under her eyes darker than usual. "They'll fix it," Ruth said softly. Ilse didn't answer. Not because she didn't want to believe it, but because she wasn't sure belief would protect her. By mid-morning, the camp director's assistant arrived to gather several internees for interviews. She carried a clipboard, one of the simplest objects in the camp, yet the most feared. A name spoken aloud could mean a family was being cleared for release, or being transferred for repatriation. The assistant's voice echoed across the courtyard. "Ruth Oppenheimer." Ruth exhaled in relief and stepped forward for her routine status review. Then another name. "Ilse Klein." Ilse froze. Her knees threatened to give out. She felt a hand slip into hers, Hildegard's, and forced herself to walk toward the administrative building. Her heart pounded so loudly she couldn't hear the footsteps around her. Inside, the office felt colder than the rest of the camp. She sat opposite the director as he leafed through a pile of documents. His expression was unreadable. "Miss Klein," he began, "we reviewed your file last night and this morning." Ilse's breath caught in her throat. "We found serious inconsistencies," he continued. "Your arrival papers list you as a stateless refugee, but Washington's records list you as a German national." "That's wrong," she whispered. "I left Germany because I had no future there. Because I was Jewish. My family." Her voice cracked. "I understand," the director said, and something in his tone softened. "But during wartime, paperwork must match across departments." Ilse felt the room tilt. "Does that mean I'm—" "No," he said firmly. "It means your case must be re-examined. You are not being moved. Not yet. Not yet." Two words with more weight than gunpowder. They held both mercy and danger. The director slid a form toward her. "Rabbi Meir provided additional documents. I need you to confirm this information, and then we will petition Washington to amend your classification." Ilse stared at the blank lines waiting for her signature. Her hand trembled as she picked up the pen. When she stepped back outside, the sun felt blinding. Ruth waited near the gate, racing toward her. "What happened? Tell me everything." Ilse tried to speak, but emotion clogged her words. "They're reconsidering. They're sending new paperwork. I'm safe, for now." Ruth pulled her into a fierce embrace. But behind her friend's joy, Ilse felt the shadow of uncertainty still lingering like a storm at the edge of the horizon. Hildegard joined them moments later, worry easing from her face when she saw Ilse upright and breathing. "I spoke with the director," she said. "He agreed to let me document some of today's proceedings. It might show Washington the reality inside these fences." Ilse touched Hildegard's arm. "You did this. You made them see me." "No," Hildegard replied. "You made them see yourself." That afternoon, Rabbi Meir gathered the women in the community hall. He placed his hands on the worn wooden table, leaning toward them with gentle authority. You have all endured more than anyone should, he said. But today reminded me of something important. Your lives matter enough for people to fight for. Hildegard, myself, the director, none of us can undo your past. But we can ensure your future isn't stolen by a clerical mistake. Murmurs of gratitude moved through the room. Some women wiped at their eyes. Others simply nodded, their shoulders relaxing slightly. Then something surprising happened. Gerda Kramer stood up holding a small paper bag from yesterday's supermarket trip. She reached inside and pulled out a bright red apple. This, she said, raising it, this is proof that lies can die. That truth can survive. Her voice wavered. Back home, we were told Americans were monsters. Today, I know better. The group fell silent. Even the children peeking through the doorframes stopped fidgeting. Ilse looked at the apple and felt a sudden warmth spread through her chest, not because of the fruit itself, but because of what it symbolized: life, choice, nourishment, possibility. All the things she had been denied. But hope, she knew, came with thorns. Later that evening, the superintendent arrived with a telegram. A hush fell as he walked through the camp. Everyone watched. Telegrams were unpredictable. They could deliver good news, or break someone's world. He approached Ilse slowly. This arrived from Washington, he said, handing it to her. Her fingers shook as she unfolded the thin paper. Review initiated. Status suspended pending identity clarification. Do not transfer. Her breath escaped in a rush, half sob, half relief. Ruth hugged her so tightly she could barely breathe. Hildegard exhaled for the first time in hours. You're safe, she whispered. Ilse looked around the camp, the fences, the barracks, the dust swirling in the twilight, and felt a strange sense of renewal. She was still trapped. Still uncertain. Still bruised by her past. But for the first time, she believed she might someday stand on the other side of those fences as a free woman. The supermarket had shattered the propaganda that chained her mind. The telegram had shattered the mistake that threatened her life. And in the space between those two truths, her future began to open like a fragile, trembling bloom.